Welcome to the Sabbath School Rescue Podcast with your host, Buster Swoopes and Michael Campbell. This week in preparation for Sabbath August 16th, we look at Lesson 7, the bread and water of life. Join us as we explore the symbolism of bread and water in this section of the Old Testament and beyond.
The Sabbath School Rescue Podcast is hosted by Michael Campbell and Buster Swoopes at the Adventist Learning Community. Together, we love learning and have 18 years of pastoral experience, and now we have the privilege to dig deeper into the study.
All right, Michael, here we are, Lesson 7, the bread and water of life. And our memory text is Exodus chapter 16, verses 28 through 30. And the Lord said to Moses, "How long do you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? See, for the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore, he gives you on the sixth day bread for 2 days. Let every man remain in his place. Let no man go out of his place on the seventh day." So the people rested on the seventh day. We see that there in the New King James Version of how God is providing, and we see many more ways and stories, historical accounts of God's provision. So, Michael, take us there for Sunday's lesson, Bitter Waters.
All right, and diving right in, we look at from Exodus chapter 15, verses 22 to 27. You have the waters of Marah and Elim. And it's very interesting here because I think it really so much of life revolves around food. I think if I could do something really fun right now, I'd do like I like Adventist history. I'd do like
Oh,
a
yes,
food history of Adventism. I think that would be that'd be kind of cool, you know?
it would be.
And so, it's like anytime you go on a trip, had enough to eat. Yesterday, this happened to me. I was just so busy between different things, and I get to the mid-afternoon, like, I just missed lunch, and I am so hungry. And you get sometimes hangry,
Yes, you do.
right? You notice you're just, like, a little bit more on edge, and anyways, I think this is what's happening with the children of Israel is when you don't have, especially not just food, but water, something to drink, you're thirsty, you're parched. It's just like, it's almost like you see a mirage, that, "Oh, if only I could see and have some water to drink." And
If
so
only.
if only. And this is what it's talking about. They're in the desert after crossing the Red Sea, this incredible, profound miracle. And it says, and then they finally get to Marah and they discover the water is bitter. You can't drink it. It's bad. And then verse 24 this is the hangry moment.
Right.
So the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What are we to drink?" And so here's this moment, maybe you'd call it a crucial conversation, right? Between
Ooh.
yeah. And then the Lord showed Moses a piece of wood, and then he threw it into the water, and the water became fit to drink. And so here we have this incredible miracle that takes place. And it says at the end of verse 25, it says he put them to the test. And then God says, if you listen carefully to the Lord your God and do what is right in his eyes, if you pay attention to his commands and keep all his decrees, I will not bring any of these diseases I brought on the Egyptians. Now we're thinking of, I'm sure, the plagues and all the terrible things that had happened. And it says, for I am the Lord who heals you. And
Mhm.
so we just see that God is the source of life. He's the source of healing and wholeness and wellness, however you want to put that. And here at this moment of testing, this crucial conversation, that they are then led to remember that our God is the God of living water. He's the God of restoration. He takes the bitter waters, makes it whole, and cures their thirst. And it's just a beautiful story of God patiently working with his people, trying to teach them, trying to remind them, hey, I did an incredible miracle, saved you across the Red Sea, but I'm not just going to leave you, but I want you to trust me and depend upon me. And if water's one part of the equation, Buster, then there's the food, the quail and the
Ah.
manna.
Yeah, so it's funny here, Michael, because the people, once again, they're a grumbling bunch, right?
They are a
Has
grumbling bunch, right?
Yeah, has much changed?
Well,
I think about my own life, and
okay,
gratitude is something we should practice, but at the same
should
time, we practice a lot of complaining. And so as much as I
I'm
want to
there
point
too.
fingers, exactly, as much as I want to point fingers, I think about it and like, man, they should be so grateful. And I look in the mirror, I'm like, I should be more grateful. Uh,
Give us a little humility, I suppose.
yeah, and so we see here the people are grumbling, verse 3, and the children of chapter 16, and the children of Israel said to them, "Oh, that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, and we ate the bread to full, not
Mm,
remembering the stripes that came along with it, and the backbreaking work of turning the straw into bricks. For you have brought us out of the wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." And then verse 4, the Lord said to Moses, "Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people will go out and gather a certain quota every day, that I might test them whether they will walk in my law or not." And we see here that there's some rules that go along with this, and to our principal contributor has done such a great job of explaining this. He says each week 4 miracles happen. This is the bottom of Monday's lesson. For the 5 days, God gave a daily allotment of manna. On Friday, a double portion of manna was given. And number 3, the manna did not spoil from Friday to Sabbath. And 4, no manna fell on the Sabbath. God was constantly performing these miracles so the people would remember the Sabbath day and celebrate God's goodness on that day. And we see here that they enjoyed this manna, but they also, verse 12, I have heard the complaints of the children of Israel. Speak to them, saying, at twilight you shall eat meat, because they said, we're not having enough meat. And in the morning you shall be filled with bread, and you shall know I'm the Lord your God. Verse 13. So it was that quails came up in the evening and covered the camp, and the dew in the morning, the dew lay all around the camp, and the layer of dew lifted there, and the surface of the wilderness was a small round substance found as frost in the ground. And it was amazing because as they ate, it says here in verse 16, this is the thing that the Lord had commanded. Let every man gather it according to each one's need. And that's what's so important here. That you're not supposed to gather so much that you become stingy. And what happens when you gather too much? Verse 20,
mm.
notwithstanding, didn't not Moses did not heed Moses, but some of them left part of it until the morning, and it bred worms and stank. So when they took too much, it melted, and they thought they could have too much. And this is a lesson as well, Michael,
Hmm,
in simplicity.
okay.
Sometimes we have way too much, and while others have way too little, and
Yeah.
recognizing we're not called to live on excess, we're called to live on what we need, and it's a lesson in that as well. So all these lessons are given here, and we see that we've gone from water, bitter waters, to now food, quail and manna, but now we're back on to water again. Tell us about Tuesday's lesson, water from the rock.
Always back to water, Buster.
Yes.
I've always wondered what that manna would have tasted like. Have you ever wondered that? Like, I don't know.
I have, one of the most memorable AY's Adventist youth programs we had was a
Yeah.
Sabbath evening. We had one of the ladies from church, one of the elder ladies. She came and she took angel food cake and she broke it up into little tiny pieces and
Really?
gave each of us kids a bag of it and said, "I believe this is what manna tasted like." And so then that's what manna's like
All
for
right.
me.
Okay. Angel food cake. I like that. And
There
they're
you go.
kind of angelic. So I don't know.
Yes.
I've heard stories of different people, especially like in the mission field, missionaries that were hungry and God provided manna for them too. So I've heard stories of that. I don't know if I could ever verify that, but
Yeah, I've
I've
read
I've
that
wondered
before.
from time to time, and it's made me wonder what it would have actually, what it would have tasted like. But anyways, those are the things you just kind of percolate through my mind sometimes. But I get all right. So let's get back to the lesson. So water, back to water. Exodus 17. This is where we get the water from the rock. I'm presuming that having a big group of people going through the desert, or the desert of sin, it's the Negev, that means the barren place. It says that they made their way to Rephidim, and it says that here there was no water for the people to drink. So they got thirsty. God took care of their thirst, and then you mentioned, Buster, how they must have been quarrelsome or troublesome bunch. It actually says here in scripture, they quarreled with Moses. Give us
Yes.
water to drink. Hey, like you're doing it to us again. And I'm pretty sure Moses is probably thinking, didn't you just see all the miracles? Like you
Come
guys
on,
seem
people, wake
a
up.
little bit high maintenance here. In fact, he says to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test?" And
Yeah.
then it just says the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. So it's just this kind of it's like a refrain, right? That, here's the same thing happening again. And of course, this time it's going a little bit further. I don't know, they're maybe hangrier or thirstier. And then they say to Moses, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst?"
Ooh.
And it's interesting because we know where they're at, we're and the lesson contributor notes that the name here, Massa, means testing, and Meribah means quarreling. So this is what it's all about, testing and quarreling.
Ooh.
And Moses reaches his limit. I think we have to recognize there's a certain human dimension of all leaders. And that's true of
Right.
biblical leaders, famous leaders like Moses, where he loses his cool is what it looks like to me. And then he cries out to God. He says, "What did I do with these people? They're almost ready to stone me."
Ooh.
And then he says, God tells him, "Go out in front of the people. Take with you the elders, take with you the staff. I'll stand before you by the rock at Horeb, strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink." And so Moses did as he was told. And then of course they say, "Is not the Lord among us or not?" So it's again this another crucial conversation, shall we say? It's a crucial moment, life moment, teaching moment where Moses is tested, his faith is tested, the people of God are tested. Moses is tested in terms of how he will lead these people. And it's not easy. Leadership is not easy. And I know there's been a lot of discussion about leadership recently because we've had a general conference session. We've had a change in leadership. We've had some leaders who are new to their position, some that are continuing in their positions, incumbents, some that maybe are looking for a new positions because the church decided to move in a different direction. In
Right.
fact, our World Church president, president of General Conference, has changed, and I think it's important that we know, and I've said this to a lot of friends. I prayed for a former GC president. I prayed for our new GC president, but from time to time, we see this throughout Adventist history and throughout salvation history. There's changes in leadership, and but I hope that we'll always be sympathetic to those leaders who have gone before, whether you agree with them or disagree with them. Always pray for them because you don't know what it's like to be in their shoes. And here we have a
Yeah.
little bit of insight from Moses, how frustrating it must have been to lead the children of Israel. And until you've actually been in those shoes, it's really difficult to judge. And so I hope that we'll give both our past leaders and our current leaders, future leaders, the benefit of the doubt, and that we pray for them, lift them up as we think of the struggle of leadership that certainly Moses had going through some pretty challenging situations here. But as we look about leadership, I think one of the model leaders that I really admire in the Bible is Jethro. So take us to Wednesday's lesson.
Yeah. So Moses' father-in-law, he comes and I think it says Moses is actually visited by Jethro. So Jethro comes and visits him and he
Hmm.
sees him. And there's this verse, and I believe it's I was looking over it earlier. I've preached on this several times, and this is what I share with young pastors and young leaders in the church as well, elders who oftentimes hoard all the responsibilities to themselves. I'm like, no, share the wealth. But he looks at Moses and says, "This thing you do, it's not good for you." Yeah. So it says, verse
Leadership
13.
has a cost.
Exactly. I believe it's verse 18, if I'm correct.
Hmm.
No, it's not verse 18. Well, verse 13 says, "And so it was the next day that Moses sat to judge the people. The people stood before Moses from morning until evening." So Moses sitting there and people are just coming to him and coming to him with these issues. And Moses is a humble person, but he's also someone who's very wise. And there it is, verse 17. This is the Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, speaking to him. "The thing that you do is not good." And I will tell you
Uh-oh.
this right now, if you're working and you're a workaholic and you're working from morning till evening, the thing that you do is not good. And so
Hmm.
what was the solution? The solution is actually quite simple yet profound. And Moses chose able men out of Israel, verse 25, and made them heads over the people, rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of fifties, and rulers of tens. And so therefore, if those tens can handle it, they went it to the fifties. And there was this chain of command that happened that gave Moses some reprieve and some chance to breathe. But he had to trust those people, and he told them what to look out for: men who were valor, men who were strong, men who were wise, men who you would admire in their characteristics. And I would say it's the same thing for our audience. Whatever responsibilities you have, we shouldn't be hoarding onto them ourselves. We should be looking for those to share the wealth with, because that's what community is all about. And we see here some very wise counsel from Jethro that is now given over to us. And I counsel our audience to please listen to that, heed it, and make life easier for yourself. So, Michael, we've had wisdom from Jethro, and now we're back on to bread and water of life. So, take us there to Thursday's lesson.
It keeps coming back to food for me. But, one thought
Amen.
that just struck me really quick as you were sharing was, I think some people don't realize the cost of leadership. And since I kind of work with research and statistics and stuff like that in my
Yes.
current role, one thing that we've noted again and again in various studies is that church leaders don't live, they live, I should say, they don't live as long as the average person or the average church member. But you have to keep in mind the average church member, the average Seventh-day Adventist that follows the kind of the Adventist health message and lifestyle tends to live several years longer than the average person. And so that benefit is kind of negated by the cost of leadership when you look at all the stress and everything else that goes often with that. So this would be a word of yeah, travel among other
Yeah.
things, stress, lack of exercise, all kinds of different things. So if you're a church leader, you're a church employee, take the Jethro counsel to heart, really think about how to make sure that you don't have someone like Jethro coming to you. This is not a good thing for you. You know,
Yeah.
that you don't pay the price later with yourself and with your loved ones. Anyways, coming back to our focus here for Thursday, the bread and water of life. I think really what the point of the lesson is to remind us what these symbols of these ancient stories, what these mean for us. And of course, Pastor Paul, 1 Corinthians 10:11 says, these were written down as warnings for us, on whom the culmination of the ages has come. And so why does God leave these stories in salvation record in the Holy Scriptures? It's so that we can learn from them. So we can, when we look at salvation history, it doesn't tell us just the good things that happened. It sometimes talks about those failures, those moments when things didn't go the way they should. And that gives us a teachable moment, a learning moment, both for back then and if we're open to the Holy Spirit's leading in our lives today as well. John chapter 4 John chapter 4 and then also John chapter 6, we have the story of the Samaritan woman who comes to Jesus, "Will you give me a drink?" And of course, she notices, "You're a Jew, I'm a Samaritan woman," as Jesus had asked her, right? "How can you ask me for a drink?" She's shocked. The cultural ramifications here are just astounding. And then Jesus says, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you
Yes.
living water."
Liver.
And she has this spiritual encounter with Jesus Christ himself. He is the living water. And I love that just the rich symbolism of Jesus, the salvation story again and again just points us back to Jesus, our need of salvation, our need of Jesus Christ, forgiveness of sin,
Mm.
our own state and our need of Jesus. And nothing reminds us of that more than when we're thirsty. I mean, I can often go and be hungry, but if I'm thirsty, I mean, even if you get lost in the wilderness, you can last for several weeks without food or a minimal amount of food, but you can only last a matter of hours or days if you don't have any water, especially if
That's
you're in
true.
some kind of hot climate or a desert. Water just is a symbol of life. That's all there is to it. And Jesus is the living water, that all of these things remind us who he is. And what a beautiful story that is again. And again, Jesus comes back, reminds them, hey, and this is the part in John chapter 6. Remember those our ancestors who ate the manna in the wilderness. So he's even as he's talking in his own ministry with people, reminding them of these very stories that we studied about this week and reminding them of this rich symbolism that points us to the plan of salvation and ultimately to Jesus Christ himself. And by the way, Jesus adds a little note there. Stop grumbling. So if you're not happy with the church, you're not happy with what's going on around you, nobody likes a grumbler. Doesn't help. You're just
Yeah,
tearing people down. And, there's always going to be a lot of grumbling that goes on in the church. People don't like this decision or that church leader. In fact, we saw a lot of that, even some protesters outside of General Conference session in St. Louis that some kind of ornery things, people are saying. And I thought, well, that's not the way to win friends and influence people. I mean, that
absolutely
just
not.
kind of breaks your heart a little bit. And so don't grumble. It doesn't help. Instead, find for opportunities, ways that you can both partake of the living water of Jesus Christ and share that living water with those around you. And that's really what it's all about.
Yeah, Michael, that's what I was going to add, which is this life is about finding true fulfillment. And I believe the only way we find that is through the Creator, who is the bread and who is the water of life. And so partake of those meals daily, find fulfillment, and then share that fulfillment with others, uh, which leads us to joy, love, peace, and freedom. And that's what Christ gives us. That's what a relationship with him gives us. And so rather than looking horizontally at all the things that are going wrong, which there are things going wrong, there's things horizontally going wrong as we look in the mirror too. But that's
Yeah,
why our eyes have to be fixated upon Jesus and our relationship with him. And therefore he helps to mend those broken horizontal relationships.
I love it. I need that living water, need
Amen.
that living bread. So, well, you've been listening to the Sabbath School Rescue podcast. So we invite you to join us back each week as we dive deeper into the scriptures. But until next week, we're your hosts, Soup,
And Swoops,
and we're signing out.
signing out.
As we wrap up, we want to give a shout out to our sponsor, the Adventist Learning Community, a ministry of the North American Division of Seventh-day Adventists.
You can join us each week by subscribing on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you like to listen to podcasts. Also, make sure you share with as many people as possible, and be sure to give us feedback by rating our podcast, and go to our website, sabbathschoolrescue.org, for each weekly episode.